There is something about an empath that is easy to misread, because the capacity they carry, the ability to feel deeply, to hold other people's complexity without flinching, to remain present through difficulty that would send most people toward the exit, looks from the outside like inexhaustibility, like a resource that does not run down, like someone who can absorb whatever the dynamic produces and continue offering the same quality of care and understanding and genuine presence indefinitely. It is not inexhaustibility. It is a very particular and very finite form of strength. And what happens when that strength is pushed past its actual limits, when the empath is broken rather than simply challenged, is one of the more significant and least discussed consequences in intimate connection. Not because it is dramatic, because it is quiet. Because the breaking of an empath does not look like breaking from the outside. It looks like them becoming fine, becoming composed, becoming the settled and self-contained person that the years of giving what was not returned eventually produce. And that composure is real, but underneath it is something that the person who broke them rarely gets to see. The closing, not of the heart exactly, of the specific and previously unconditional orientation toward other people's interior lives that made the empath who they were. The particular quality of their presence, the fullness of it, the way it reached toward people without requiring safety in advance, the way it offered understanding before it was deserved, that quality does not survive being broken unchanged. It contracts, becomes more careful, more boundaried in ways that are genuinely healthy, and also represent the permanent loss of something that was rare when it existed in its original form. Let me describe what breaking an empath actually involves, because it is not a single event, it is a process, and the process has a specific shape that is worth understanding. The empath begins in their characteristic orientation, turned outward, genuinely invested in the interior lives of the people they love, extending the specific and unusual quality of their attention toward understanding rather than toward judgment, holding space with the patience that their particular sensitivity makes possible, bringing to intimate connection a quality of presence that most people experience rarely, if at all, in their relational lives. In the early stages of the breaking, this orientation continues through the first disappointments, through the first experiences of the giving not being returned proportionally, through the first encounters with the specific and personal cost of caring deeply about someone whose capacity to receive care is limited. The empath continues because the continuing feels like love, and because hope, in its early stages, is still stronger than the accumulating evidence of the cost. The middle stages of the breaking are where the adaptation begins. The empath starts, gradually and without fully acknowledging it to themselves, adjusting the orientation, pulling back small increments of the attention and the care in response to the evidence that the full extension of it is not sustainable, becoming slightly more careful about where the reaching goes, developing, almost without choosing to, a more measured quality of investment that is less than what was natural before. This adaptation is reasonable. Is the nervous system doing what nervous systems do when they encounter sustained experience of output exceeding input? It is also the beginning of the closing. The late stages are where the breaking becomes visible to the empath themselves, where what was a gradual adaptation reveals itself as something more total, where the empath looks at the quality of their own engagement with the people around them and notices something that was not there before. A distance, a slight but definite increase in the space maintained between their own interior and everyone else's, a decreased automatic orientation toward other people's experience as the primary territory of their attention, a self-containment that arrived not through choice, but through the slow and necessary withdrawal of a self that was insufficiently protected for too long. The consequences of breaking an empath are real, and I want to describe them honestly rather than in the dramatic terms the title might suggest. The first consequence is for the empath themselves. The quality of life that existed inside the full and open orientation is not entirely recoverable. Not because the empath is permanently damaged, because the recovery from genuine breaking produces a different kind of person than the original. Not lesser, different, more boundaried, more careful, more attuned to the cost of the extending before the extending happens, more likely to assess before investing, less likely to offer the unconditional quality of presence that was available before the breaking. These are in many ways healthy developments. The empath who emerges from the breaking is more protected than the one who entered it, better calibrated to the actual exchange rate of the connections they inhabit, less likely to absorb what is not theirs to carry or to extend past the point where genuine reciprocity is present. But something is also genuinely lost. The specific quality of the original orientation, the reaching without the prior assessment, the trusting without the prior evidence, the giving without the calculation of what the giving will cost, that quality does not return entirely. It becomes conditional in ways it was not before, and the world is slightly less nourished by the loss of it than it would have been by its continuation. The second consequence is for the person who did the breaking, and this is where the brutal in the title lives. Not in any form of retaliation or cosmic justice, in something quieter and more final than either of those things. They lost access to something they will not find again in the same form. The empath's particular quality of presence is not abundant in the world. The specific combination of genuine depth and genuine patience and genuine orientation toward other people's interior as a place worth understanding rather than managing is rare. And the person who broke that, who took years of it without reciprocating at a sustainable level, who consumed the unconditional quality of the empath's giving until the conditionality arrived out of necessity, that person lost access to something that the world does not readily replace, not immediately, not in the weeks following the breaking, but over time, in the subsequent connections that approach but do not reach what existed with the empath, in the specific and persistent flatness of a life from which that quality of presence has been removed. The loss makes itself known, not as punishment, as the simple and permanent consequence of having been in the presence of something rare and having been unable, for whatever combination of reasons, to meet it in kind. There is something worth saying about why empaths get broken in avoidant relationships specifically, because there is a specific compatibility between the empath's particular gifts and the avoidant's particular limitations that makes the dynamic both compelling and costly in ways that other combinations do not quite produce. The empath's gift is understanding without demand, the capacity to hold complexity without requiring it to resolve, the ability to be with someone's difficulty without making the difficulty into a problem that needs to be fixed or a burden that needs to be relieved. This gift is precisely what the avoidance nervous system has been looking for without knowing it was looking. The architecture was built to manage the pressure of being needed, of being someone else's primary source of okayness, of intimacy arriving as demand rather than as genuine presence. The empath does not arrive as demand, arrives as genuine presence, as the specific and rare experience of being understood, without the understanding becoming a lever for what the understanding is supposed to produce in return. The avoidance nervous system exhales in the empath's presence, finds, for possibly the first time in the context of genuine intimacy, something that does not activate the threat response, something that feels like the possibility of connection without the cost of connection as they have always experienced it. And the empath, feeling the avoidance exhale, feeling the specific quality of someone finally actually receiving what they are offering, extends further, gives more, reaches deeper into the reserves of their particular capacity, because finally, here is someone who can receive it. And the avoidant, having exhaled, having found the space that the empath's non-demanding presence creates, does what the architecture does when the pressure is reduced, stays at the reduced pressure level, does not move toward the empath with the reciprocal investment that the empath's reaching calls for, remains in the comfortable space created by the empath's gift without generating the equivalent space in return. And the empath, giving and not receiving in proportion, gives more, because the giving is what they know, because the specific quality of being actually received, even without reciprocation, is enough for a while to sustain the investment, until it is not enough, until the breaking begins. The breaking does not announce itself. That is one of the more important things to understand about what happens to an empath when the dynamic has finally extracted more than what was sustainable to give. From the outside, nothing dramatic occurs. There is no visible collapse, no confrontation that marks the turning point, no single moment where something snaps in a way that is legible to the person who caused it. The empath continues being present, continues being kind, continues bringing the quality of attention and care that was always their characteristic way of moving through the world. But something has shifted underneath the continuity, something quiet and fundamental. The orientation that was previously automatic, the reaching toward other people's interior as the natural direction of their attention, begins requiring effort in a way it never did before. The giving that was previously the natural expression of who they are begins involving a calculation, however subtle, that was not there in the original form of their capacity. The empath is still an empath, still feels deeply, still carries the particular sensitivity that makes the interior lives of the people around them legible in ways that other people's interiors are not legible to most. But the relationship between that sensitivity and their behavior has changed. There is now a distance between what they feel and what they extend, a gap where there was previously none, a moment of assessment that precedes the giving in a way that the giving previously preceded itself. That gap is the consequence, not visible, not dramatic, real. I want to be precise about what the breaking produces in the empath over time, because the immediate aftermath and the longer-term aftermath are different, and both are worth understanding. In the immediate aftermath of the breaking, the empath often experiences something that feels like freedom, the lifting of a weight they did not fully know they were carrying, the specific relief of someone who has finally, for whatever combination of reasons, stopped extending past the point where the extending was sustainable, the quiet and slightly disorienting experience of having more available for themselves than they have had in a long time. This relief is real, and it can be mistaken for healing, for the completion of the recovery, for the arrival at the other side of the dynamic with the resources replenished and the orientation restored. It is not quite that. It is the early stage of a longer process, and what the longer process reveals, as the relief settles into the ordinary texture of the days that follow, is something more complicated than simply being free of what costs so much. The empath discovers that the capacity, which felt so abundant for so long, has edges that were not previously visible, that there are people and situations that would previously have produced the automatic orientation, the genuine and unconditional reaching toward understanding, that now produce something more measured, more careful, more attentive to what the extension will cost before the extension happens. In many contexts, this is wisdom, is the appropriate calibration of a capacity that was previously too unconditional for the empath's own sustainable functioning. In some contexts, it is loss. The specific loss of the quality of presence that made the empath who they were at their most generous. The loss of the reaching that happened before the assessment. The loss of the trust that preceded the evidence. Both things are true simultaneously. The calibration is necessary and represents genuine growth. And something that was rare and valuable existed in the uncalibrated version that does not exist in the same form in the calibrated one. The person who broke the empath tends to encounter the consequence in a specific and recognizable way, not immediately, over time, through the experience of subsequent connections that fail to produce the quality of presence the empath provided. Not because subsequent people are less worthy, because the empath's particular gift was specific, was the product of their particular sensitivity and their particular history, and the particular uncalibrated quality of their reaching that the breaking has since modified. It was not a generic quality of attentiveness that any sufficiently caring person provides. It was theirs specifically, and losing access to it is losing access to something that does not have a like-for-like replacement. The person who did the breaking tends to discover this through absence, through the specific and persistent flatness of connections that are good enough by most measures and do not reach what existed with the empath, through the particular quality of being understood which the empath provided so naturally that its presence went unremarked, and its absence is now conspicuous in a way the presence never was. That conspicuousness is not punishment. It is not cosmic consequence or karmic return. It is the simple and final reality of having had access to something rare and having been unable, for whatever reasons, to reciprocate in the way that would have made the access sustainable. The empath protected themselves, as they should have, as they deserved to do long before the breaking made it necessary, and the protection cost the person who made it necessary something they are unlikely to fully recover. Not because the empath withdrew in anger, because the empath's gift, in its original and most generous form, was available in the conditions that produced it, and those conditions no longer exist. There is something worth saying about what the empath deserves now, after the breaking, after the consequence, after the recalibration that the breaking made necessary. They deserve to exist in the calibrated version of themselves without apology, without the subtle self-criticism that can arrive when the empath notices that they are now more careful, more boundaried, more attentive to cost before extending than they used to be, without the narrative that the calibration represents a diminishment of who they are, rather than the hard-won, appropriate protection of who they are. The uncalibrated version was beautiful, was genuinely rare, and it was also insufficiently protected, was available to anyone who arrived with enough need and enough apparent receptivity, regardless of whether the reciprocity was actually present, was extending past the point of sustainable exchange, because the extending felt like the expression of who they were, rather than a choice they were continuously making. The calibrated version is still an empath, still feels deeply, still brings a quality of attention and genuine understanding to the connections they inhabit that most people experience rarely, still has access to the particular gifts that their sensitivity made possible. But now the gifts are offered from solid ground, from someone who knows the cost of the extension and has decided that the cost is worth paying for this specific person in this specific connection, not from someone who extends before the assessment because extending is what they do. That groundedness is not the loss of the gift. It is the gift finally protected well enough to be sustainable, to be offered in the specific and chosen and genuinely reciprocal conditions it always deserved, rather than in the unconditional and ultimately unsustainable conditions that made the breaking possible. The empath who healed from being broken is not less than the empath who was broken. They are more whole, more genuinely themselves, more capable of choosing where the gift goes, rather than offering it automatically to whoever arrived with sufficient need. That choosing is not coldness, it is the completion of themselves, finally. The empath who came through the breaking carries something the unbroken version did not. The knowledge that they survived it, that the capacity is still present, still genuine, still capable of the depth it was always capable of, and now paired with the honest understanding of what it is worth, of what conditions deserve it, of what reciprocity looks like, and how quickly the body can be trusted to report its absence. That knowledge is not a wound, it is the completion of themselves. That knowledge changes how the empath moves through the world, not with suspicion, with clarity. The clarity of someone who knows their own value precisely enough to recognize when it is being met and when it is being consumed. The gift is still there, fully, genuinely. But now it is offered as a choice rather than as a reflex. And that distinction, small as it sounds, is the difference between a life spent giving and a life spent living. The empath who came through the breaking is not waiting to be recognized. They already know what they are worth. And that knowing is the most consequential thing the breaking produced. Not the wound, the clarity. The clarity does not arrive loudly. That is worth saying. It does not announce itself as strength or declare itself as the lesson the breaking was supposed to teach. It settles, quietly, into the ordinary moments of a life that is gradually, without drama, becoming more genuinely inhabited. The empath notices it first in small things. In the moment before extending care, where there was previously no moment, where the extending simply happened before any awareness of it as a choice. Now there is a brief and honest pause. Not calculation exactly, recognition. The recognition of what is being offered, and whether the offering is moving towards something that will receive it as the genuine thing it is. That pause is new, and it is good. Not because withholding is good, because choosing is better than reflexing, because a gift offered from genuine choice carries something that a gift offered from pure reflex does not. The full weight of the person behind it. The actual presence of someone who decided, rather than someone who simply could not help themselves. The empath who came through the breaking gives differently now, not less, not more carefully in the sense of more sparingly, more presently, more genuinely, more from the actual self rather than from the automatic orientation that preceded the self's full arrival in the moment. That is the consequence the breaking produced that nobody talks about, not the wound, not the closing, the arrival of the empath into their own life as its primary inhabitant, rather than as someone who was always slightly elsewhere, in someone else's interior, extending the gift before they had fully arrived in themselves. The breaking brought them home, to themselves, which is where the gift was always most genuinely available from, and where it will remain.